January 17, 1945, somewhere over the frozen fields of the Ardennes. The sky was pale, chalked over with cloud, torn open in places by low winter sun. At 22,000 feet, the air bit cold enough to crack metal. Inside the cramped cockpit of a Focke-Wulf FW-190, Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Müller watched his breath fog against the glass. His gloves were thin. His oxygen mask smelled of rubber and old sweat. Behind him, the fatherland was starving. Ahead of him, silver shapes rolled through the blue tight, gleaming, impossibly numerous. American bombers. And beneath them, sleek and painted like carnival toys, came the fighters. Müller's eyes tracked one, a P-51 Mustang, long-nosed and arrogant in the light. But it wasn't the aircraft that seized his attention. It was the name. Painted in tall white letters along the fuselage, just behind the exhaust stacks, bold as a signature. Big Beautiful Doll. Below it, the painted face of a woman, red lips, blonde curls, a wink frozen in enamel. And beside that name, 23 tiny black swastikas stenciled in a neat vertical row, 23 kills. Müller felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. He had long since made peace with death. It was something stranger. Something closer to disbelief. The Americans had named their machines. There had been a time, not so long ago, when German pilots ruled the sky like gods among mortals. In 1940, during the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe's professionalism born from discipline, training, and the purity of the cause. Their aircraft bore only numbers, squadron insignias, and the Iron Cross, symbols of the Reich, not of individual vanity. A fighter plane was a tool of the state. A weapon, it was not a personality. To paint a name on your aircraft, to give it identity beyond its tactical function, was seen as frivolous, unserious. The Luftwaffe had been built on order, on hierarchy. Every rivet, every formation, every mission was designed to reflect the greater machine. You were not an individual. You were part of the whole. To mark your plane with sentiment was to indulge in weakness. And yet, by 1945, those same German aces, men who had once flown with absolute confidence, who had destroyed entire squadrons over Poland and France and Russia, now found themselves outnumbered, outgunned, and forced to reckon with an enemy that refused to follow any logic they understood. The Americans did not fly like soldiers. They flew like artists, like gamblers, like men who believed they could not lose. And their planes, those shining, candy-colored fighters and bombers, were painted not with numbers but with asterisk names. With asterisk faces asterisk. With pin-up girls and cartoons and slogans ripped from Hollywood and baseball fields and smoky jazz clubs. Names like Knockout Dropper, Hell's Angel, Passionate Witch, Memphis Belle. Names that laughed, names that boasted, names that spoke not of duty but of asterisk pride. It was madness, and it was everywhere. Heinrich Müller had joined the Luftwaffe in 1939. A boy of 19 with sharp eyes and steady hands. He had flown his first combat mission over France in 1940. He had seen Spitfires tumble from the clouds. He had watched cities burn. He had returned home to parades, to medals, to the Führer's praise delivered through crackling radios in dimly lit rooms. But that had been another war. By the winter of 1945, the parades had stopped. The medals came without ceremony. Food was rationed so tightly that pilots flew on empty stomachs, high on benzodrine and bitterness. The mechanics patched holes with scrap metal. The fuel was synthetic, cooked from coal, and it smelled like poison. And every mission, every single sortie, felt less like warfare and more like sacrifice. And still the Americans came. Wave after wave, endless. Their bombers flew in formations so large they blotted out the sun. Their fighters escorted them with an arrogance that bordered on cruelty, and always those names. Those absurd, colorful human names. Müller had shot down 7 American aircraft. He had read their wreckage. Inside one B-17, blown apart over Stuttgart, he had found a photograph taped to the navigator's station. A woman and 2 children smiling. On the bulkhead, Mueller did not know where Kansas was. He did not know what kind of place produced men who flew to their deaths with photographs of wives and jokes written on walls. He did not know how to reconcile the image of the enemy, this soft, decadent, materialistic America, with the reality he faced in the sky. These men were not soft, they were relentless. The practice of naming aircraft was not new. The British had done it, to some extent, during the First World War. Pilots painted nicknames and personal insignias on their biplanes. But it remained rare, restrained. The Germans, in contrast, avoided it almost entirely. Even the great aces, men like Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron himself, marked their planes with color and number, not with sentiment. It was the Americans who made it a culture. In the United States Army Air Forces, naming your bomber or fighter was not just permitted, it was expected. Crews held contests. They painted elaborate nose art, commissioning artists from within their own ranks or from nearby towns. They drew inspiration from girlfriends, from movies, from songs on the radio. A B-24 Liberator might be called * Strawberry Bitch. A P-Thunderbolt might bear the name Razorback. The images were vivid: pin-up girls in swimsuits, snarling tigers, dice and playing cards, devils and angels. For the Americans, the plane was not just a machine. It was a * companion *, a * partner *. You flew with it, you trust. To the Germans, this was incomprehensible. It wasn't just strange. It was * wasteful *. Paint added weight. Decoration took time. In a rational war, one governed by efficiency and necessity, such frivolities had no place. But the Americans were not fighting a rational war. They were fighting a * righteous *1. Hauptmann Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring fighter ace in history with 352 confirmed kills, once remarked to a fellow pilot after the war, "The first time I saw an American Mustang up close, I thought it was a mistake. I thought someone had let a child paint it." The plane in question, down near Berlin in early 1945, was adorned with the image of a blonde woman in a red dress. Her name, painted in flowing script, was * Loretta. Below her image the words, "From Tulsa with love." Hartmann studied the wreckage in silence. The paint was flawless, the craftsmanship absurd. Someone had spent * hours on this. Someone had cared. And that, he realized, was the point. The Americans were telling them something. They were saying, "We are so confident in our victory that we can afford to waste time on beauty. We can afford to laugh." It was a message written not in fire but in color, not in terror but in pride, and it was devastating. By 1944, the disparity between the Luftwaffe and the United States Army Air Forces had become impossible to ignore. German pilots flew until they died. There were no rotations, no rest, no end to the missions. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition was rationed. The new jets, Messerschmitt Me 262s, technological marvels, were too few and arrived too late. The Americans, meanwhile, seemed to have * everything. Their bombers flew in 1,000-plane raids. Their fighters had range enough to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. They had spare parts. They had fuel. They had * choice *. A downed American pilot might be back in the air within a week, flying a brand new plane fresh from a factory in Wichita or Burbank. And each of those planes arrived blank, unpainted, anonymous. But not for long. Within days, the crew would gather. They would argue, joke, vote. Someone would sketch a design. Someone else would find paint, scarlet, gold, cobalt blue. And then, in the cold English rain or the Sicilian sun, they would transform a machine of war into a piece of themselves. A German pilot named Joseph Priller, who flew until the very last days of the war, later wrote, "I began to understand that we were not fighting a play." That was the word he used, and he was right. The symbolic weight of the names went deeper than morale or individuality. It was about ownership *. In the Wehrmacht, in the Luftwaffe, soldiers did not own anything. The rifle you carried was the state's. The aircraft you flew belonged to the Reich. You were expendable, replaceable, a cog. But in the American military, the relationship was different. The men who flew those planes, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students from California, came from a culture that prized personal freedom above all. The idea that a man could not name his own plane, could not mark it with his own story, was alien. And so they painted. They painted women they loved, women they longed for, women they invented. They painted hometowns and baseball teams and cartoon characters. They painted luck and humor and fury. They painted humanity asterisk. And when those planes screamed through the sky at 400 miles per hour, guns blazing, engines roaring, and belief, it turned out, was a weapon too. Heinrich Müller died on February 3, 1945. His Focke-Wulf was hit by a P-51 Mustang named Contrary Mary. He did not bail out. He did not scream. He simply fell, trailing smoke and flame, into a frozen field south of Dresden. The American pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes of Boise, Idaho, returned to base and added another kill marking to his fuselage. He and his crew chief repainted Contrary Marys, nose art that evening, touching up the colors where flak had chipped the paint. Müller's plane was not recovered. It burned until there was nothing left but twisted metal and ash. No one painted it. No one named it. It simply was, and then it was not. In the decades after the war, the nose art of American aircraft became iconic. Museums displayed restored bombers with their original names intact. Historians cataloged the designs. Veterans' reunions featured men standing beside the planes they had flown, hands resting on faded paint, tears in their eyes. The Germans, meanwhile, remembered their pilots for their skill, for their courage, for their impossible odds. But they did not remember the planes. The planes were gray. The planes were numbered. The planes were forgotten. And perhaps that is the final quality. The Americans did not paint their planes because they were naive or sentimental or wasteful. They painted them because they believed in tomorrow. They painted them because they believed they would come home. They painted them because, even in war, they refused to surrender the idea that a man could be more than a number, that a machine could carry not just bombs but hope, that even in the sky, even in the fire, even in the face of death, you could still have a name . And that name could mean something. It could mean everything . The last German ace to surrender, Oberstleutnant Heinz Baer, was captured in May 1945. Allied forces found him standing beside the wreckage of his Me-262, hands raised, face gaunt. When asked what he remembered most about fighting the Americans, he paused for a long time. Then he said, "The colors, I remember the colors." He did not elaborate. Somewhere over the Ardennes, on a cold January morning in 1945, a young German pilot looked up and saw a name painted on the side of an enemy fighter. He did not understand it. He did not agree with it. But for just a moment before the bullets came, before the fire and the fall, he saw it. He saw the name. And he knew, with the terrible clarity that comes only at the end, that he was not fighting men who believed they might win. He was fighting men who had already won. Not in the sky, not on the battlefield, but in the part of the soul that dares to hope, to love, to laugh, to paint a name on steel and call it home. And that, more than any weapon, more than any strategy, more than any number of planes or bombs,